Good evening. Are you ready tonight for the seventh edition of our Hagaddah Insights? We're going to start off on the paragraph of Baruch Shomer Havtachaso Liyisrael. Blessed is the one who heeds his promise to the Jewish nation. And again, this is from his commentary called Binas Aaron, which is generally focused on Pilpul. And he says as follows with regards to Hashem keeping his promise. That in Parshas Vayigash, it says that when Yaakov Avinu was faced with the need to go to Mitzrayim, Hashem said to him, Al tira me rida Mitzrayim. Don't fear going down to Egypt. Ki legoy gadol asimcha sham, because I will make you there into a great nation. Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayim, and I will go down to Egypt with you. And he says that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh poses a question. What was it that made Yaakov so afraid to go down to Mitzrayim? And if it was because of the exile, how is he succeeding in removing that fear by promising Yaakov that I'll make you into a great nation? How is that going to remove Yaakov's concern about the results of going down to Mitzrayim? So the Binas Aaron answers the question by saying that there are a number of reasons given why Klal Yisrael got out of Mitzrayim earlier than they were supposed to, right? Because Avram Avinu had been told that his offspring would be in a strange land for 400 years. The fact of the matter is we were there for only 210 years. What happened to the rest of the time that we were supposed to be there? So two of the reasons given are, first of all, that because the Jewish nation had such a population explosion, so the greater population worked in 210 years as much as the smaller population would have worked in 400 years. So it ended up shortening the time. Another reason given is that the Shekhinah, the presence of God, went down with the Jewish nation to Mitzrayim, and the Shekhinah's presence in exile as well, that's what shortened the amount of time that they had to be there. And another point is that the pasuk says that when it was time to go out of Mitzrayim, v'lo yochlu lihisma meah, that they could not tarry any longer. Why? Because they were about to reach the Jewish nation as a whole, the lowest possible point of humanity. And had they sunk so low, they never would have been redeemed. So based on this, all this, he explains that Yaakov Avinu was afraid to go down to Mitzrayim. Why? Because he was afraid that the Jewish people would sink to that lowest level of impurity and never be able to come out. And that's why in the pasuk of Vayigash, Hashem answered Yaakov Avinu two things. Al tira me rida Mitzrayim, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, because you're not going to be there that long. You're not going to be there enough time to sink to the lowest levels of depravity. Why not? First of all, legoy gadol asimcha sham, I will turn you into a great nation there. And that's one reason why the amount of time you'll have to be in Mitzrayim will be cut short. And second of all, anochi ered imcha Mitzrayim, I will go down together with you in Mitzrayim. And the presence of my Shekhinah in Mitzrayim will also cut down the amount of time you have to be there from 400 years to 210 years. And therefore you don't have to worry about your offspring sinking to the depth of Mitzrayim and never getting out. The next paragraph in the Haggadah is the paragraph of Vihi she'amdo la'avoseinu v'lanu. It, is what stood for our ancestors and us. That there was something which prevented us from being destroyed by the nations for all the generations. And the custom is to pick up your cup of wine and sing this with great joy. And the Vihi, what is that thing that we're mentioning is what stood for us throughout all the generations and did not allow our enemies to destroy us. So it refers back to the previous pasuk about the bris bein habesarim, the covenant between the pieces that Hashem made with Avram Avinu. That's what prevented us from getting destroyed. And Rav Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg mentions that it's also symbolized by the cup of wine. The Chida already says this in others in earlier generations, but he elaborates this very interestingly. Because the halacha is that we are not supposed to drink wine made by a non-Jew. And the reason why is because once you start drinking with somebody else, somebody from another nation, the next thing you're going to end up doing is marrying his daughter. Meaning drinking together is what leads to intermarriage. So the cup of wine symbolizes the barriers of separation that we as Jews set up between ourselves and others in order to prevent intermarriage and to preserve the Jewish nation. And the first one to set up those barriers and to distinguish himself from those who surrounded him, that was Avram Avinu. He doesn't quote it, but there's a famous Chazal that says, why was Avram called Avram Ha'ivri, Avram from the other side? Because the whole world was on one side and Avraham was on the other side. And another thing Avram Avinu did in order to distinguish himself from all of the other people of his time was the mitzvah of bris milah. Nobody else in those days was circumcised. He was the first one to get a circumcision. And of course, as we know, that's one of the distinguishing features of a Jew. And interestingly, it's not until he has the bris and has his name changed from Avram to Avraham that he goes from being the father only of the nation of Aram to being the Av Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations. It was not until Avram said, I am different from everybody else, I am unique and separate, that gave him the ability to become the leader of the world. And the point Rav Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg takes out of here is that it's only if a Jew separates himself from everybody else and makes himself distinguished and special as a Jew, that's when other people will respect him. But if he chooses to become just like everybody else, then he's going to lose that respect entirely. Interestingly, and I've chosen not to go through this whole part, but he also discusses at length his suffering in the city of Warsaw during the war years and discussing the various issues that came up with Jewish people who were working for the Nazi authorities. He actually is quite charitable to them. And he tries to suggest that maybe they thought they were making life easier for their Jews by doing some of the work that otherwise the Nazis would have done. And for someone who suffered from them, I thought that was pretty charitable of him. But we have enough unfortunate things going on in the world today that I'm going to choose not to focus on any of that. In the Sefer Lamudim Benisim, he says as follows. Again, that Vihisha Amda is a continuation of what we said, that at the Bris Bein HaBesarim, Hashem decreed that the Jewish people are going to be strangers in a strange land for 400 years. Again, he poses the same question we were talking about a few minutes ago, that Klal Yisrael was only there for 210 years. And he wants to, so after you read the previous paragraph, you might ask the question, we were supposed to be there for 400 years, we're only there for 210 years. Maybe we still owe some time. Maybe we should be concerned that we're going to be sent back to Egypt in order to make up the missing time. So he says that's why the next paragraph begins, V'hi sha'amda la'avosenu v'lanu, that this stood for our ancestors and us. Namely, that this concept of being in a land that we don't own did not just begin when the Jewish nation went down to Mitzrayim, but rather it began with our ancestors Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Really, from the time that Yitzchak was born, that's what's considered to be the beginning of the exile in a land that was not us. So that's what we mentioned. It was la'avosenu v'lanu. Both our ancestors and us were in exile, and together that combines to the 400 years. And that's why we mentioned also about Shebachol Dor V'Dor, Omdim Aleinu L'Chalusenu, that in every generation they get up to destroy us. Because we're saying again, it wasn't just a generation of the Jewish people who were in Egypt, but it was also the previous generation under the leadership of the patriarchs. They were also under threat of being destroyed. And because as you segue into the next paragraph, it says, Tseu Lamad Mabikesh Lavan Harami Lasos Liakov Avinu, because we see that even Lavan wanted to destroy the Jewish nation. So the exile and the existential threat didn't just begin in Egypt, but it began generations before that. As we continue on in the next paragraph, in the Lemudim Benisan, it quotes the pasuk of Arami Oved Avi, which the most basic understanding would mean that the person from Aram, that's Lavan, tried to destroy my father, which is Yaakov Avinu. So Lavan is referred to here as Arami, and Yaakov is referred over here as Avi. And he points out that if you do Yaakov minus Avi, it's equal to the same thing as Arami minus Lavan, to show you the connection between the two of them. And Lavan, he says, is referred to as Arami in order to tell you that Lavan was not just coming with his own private agenda, but he was coming with the agenda of his whole community in Aram. He also points out that Arami is the same letters as Ramai, which is someone who is deceitful, which, as we know, Lavan was deceitful, and Lavan tried to use his deceitfulness against Yaakov by tricking him into marrying Leah rather than Rachel. But our sages tell us that Yaakov himself informed Rachel that Achi Aviyahu, that he was just as much of a con artist as Lavan was. And actually, the gematria, the numerical value of Yaakov Avinu, is the exact same gematria value as Arami or Ramai. And so he wants to suggest when it says Arami Oved Avi, it's saying my father Yaakov was the Arami, because he was the same level of deceitfulness as Lavan was. Going back to assuming Arami is Lavan and Oved Avi means the way in which he tried to destroy Yaakov by the difficulties he put Yaakov through. So he also points out that before Yaakov got married, he worked for Lavan for 7 years, which is the gematria, the numerical value of Oved. Aleph Beis Dalet is gematria 7. And after he got married, he worked for Lavan another 13 years. So that's alluded to in the word Avi, which has the gematria of 13. Finally, he tells us that we see later on by the final meeting between Yaakov and Lavan, when they make a treaty between them, and there is a rock that they decide should be witness to their treaty. And Lavan refers to the rock as Yigar Sahadusa, which means the rock of testimony. But the rock of testimony, those words Yigar Sahadusa, is the same gematria, the same numerical value as Ger Yi Zaracha Be'eretz Lo Lahem, of what Hashem told Avram Avinu, that his offspring would be strangers in a land that isn't theirs. So he wants to say, that's why the pasuk says, Arami Ovid Avi Vayered Mitzrayma, that those words, Yigar Sahadusa, which are the only Aramaic words that you find in the Torah, they allude to the fact of Vayered Mitzrayma, that the Jewish people would go down to Egypt. But Yaakov didn't use a word that would allude to the fact that the Jewish people were going to go down to Egypt. Yaakov called it Gal Eid. Again, that means the same thing, the stone of testimony, but that was in Hebrew. And Gal Eid is the same numerical value as Yetzu, that they will go out. As the pasuk says, V'achar kein Yetzu, that Hashem promised that eventually the Jewish people would go out of Egypt. So according to this, Lavan picked a term indicating the fact that the Jewish nation would end up in Egypt, and Yaakov picked a term that would allude to the fact that Klal Yisrael would get out of Egypt. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good evening. This week's